This is a cool one because it turns out, there were a lot of reasons, there has been a lot of discussion about why the genders segregate in terms of occupation. And sometimes that's taken the form of an IQ argument. So I don't know if you guys remember this because maybe it's too long ago, but this president of Harvard University, whose name was Larry Summers, he also served in whose cabinet? I don't remember at the moment. It's probably Obama's, but I'm afraid I don't remember. Anyways, Larry Summers is a very high, powerful person in the United States. And he was giving a talk at Harvard at one point, and when the Americans started to get concerned about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the STEM subjects, because they're kind of thinking we need more people in the STEM subjects in order to kickstart the economy, which may or may not be true, but anyways, that was the idea. And one of the problems that was being dealt with was the relative dearth of women in the STEM disciplines. And Summers made reference to a body of research that suggested that. So take that normal distribution there, okay? You see that one on the screen. Now imagine you put another one right on top of that, but you flattened it. So you just pushed it down right in the middle. And so what would happen is, it's a little lower in the middle, but it goes out a little farther on the sides. And so then what happens, which is analogous to what I told you happened with agreeableness, is that if you go out 4 standard deviations above the mean, so let's say to the 99, 85, 95, 99, to the 99.9th percentile, so 1 person in 1,000. Assume 1 person in 1,000 becomes a genius level, is capable of genius level accomplishment in the STEM areas. Okay, so maybe it's more than that, but let's say 1 in 1,000. You're going to get a pretty decent person at that rate. They're all going to be men if the male curve is flatter. But if you go down the other side of the distribution and you look for the person who's 1 in 1,000 most intellectually impaired, they're also going to be men. And so that idea was that the mean levels of IQ between men and women are the same, but the standard deviation is different. And the underlying biological justification for that, roughly speaking, is there often is more variability in male behavior across animal species because males are actually more expendable than females. And there's a differential reproduction rate among males that's high enough so that you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. Now you think, well, that's impossible, but it's not. If the average woman had one child, if the average woman had one child throughout history and the average man who had children had 2, then that's what you'd get. But what it would mean is that there's an equal number of men would have had 0. And the distribution for men in fathering is a lot more like that. It's a pretty high probability that a woman will have at least 1 child, where it's a relatively high probability that a man won't. And so that's all you need. And so given that difference in reproductive value in some sense, it's not like the men don't have reproductive value, it's that the reproductive value can be fulfilled by a relatively small number of men. So men aren't the limiting factor in reproduction, women are, and that's across species. And so what happens is the males seem to get more variable in their behavioral display because there's more advantage to winning and not. And once you lose, it doesn't matter how much you lose by, in some sense. So anyways, he got harassed to death for that. I think I don't remember what happened to him, but I think he had to stop being president of Harvard University. But he didn't even say that was true. He just said that it was one of the possibilities. There is debate about that. There's no debate, virtually no debate about the average IQ. There is some debate about the standard deviations. And I think the strongest evidence is sort of in line with the testosterone, the fetal testosterone exposure, is that men have a small edge in spatial reasoning. And that's mental rotation, for example. And that seems to be associated with higher levels of fetal testosterone. Now, you do also see sometimes that women have a small edge in verbal intelligence and verbal fluency. But that might be more associated with trait openness, because trait openness, the creativity part of trait openness is higher among women than it is among men. But regardless of all that, what really seems to make the difference with regards to the way that the sexes distribute themselves in the career landscape is interest. And the biggest differences between men and women that are normally recorded are recorded in terms of interest. And the basic distribution seems to be people versus things, which is quite cool because that was derived as an independent dimension before Simon Baron-Cohen started to do his work on fetal testosterone exposure. And those things just happen to map onto each other. Like his empathizing versus systematizing is a lot like people versus things. And it also looks a lot like agreeableness. And in fact, I have a student, we checked that out. We took Simon Baron-Cohen's questionnaire and mapped it onto the big five. And the empathizing dimension is, you know, indistinguishable from agreeableness. Systematizing looks a bit more complex. We haven't quite sorted that out. But, so, men prefer working with things and women with people. And the effect size is almost 1 standard deviation, which is, well, it's a remarkably powerful effect size. You rarely see an effect size of that magnitude in psychology or in the social sciences. It's a very big determinant. So men show stronger, people have categorized jobs into 6 categories using this thing they call RIASEC. Realistic, investigative, artistic, social, and conventional. Realistic, investigative, artistic, social, conventional. No difference in enterprising. Yeah, the middle one is enterprising. And that's kind of a factor analysis derived categorization system too, and it is related in intelligible ways to the big five. So anyways, men show stronger realistic and investigative interests, and women show stronger artistic, social, and conventional interests. So, and there's no difference in entrepreneurial interest, essentially. So, I don't know what you think about that, but see, one of the things that's happened, oh yes, that's actually what this next slide talks about, so that's very good. Difference between men and women interest in engineering, science, and math. So the men are much, much more interested in engineering. It's a big, big effect. They're somewhat more interested in science, and that'd be the harder ends of the science that aren't social, you know. And they're more interested in math. And so one of the things that you see happens, for example, if you take high math achievers at grade 11 or grade 10, there's not a huge difference in numbers between girls and boys in the United States. But if you track them across time, the proportion of the high ability people who go into mathematics or an allied discipline is way higher among the boys than it is among the girls. You can make a case that there's some social, you know, maybe there's some social conditioning that's associated with that, except that it's hard to make that case when the only people you're picking are people who are already equally good at mathematics, because if it was cultural, you'd think that you wouldn't be able to pull them out to begin with. You have to make the case that all the cultural difference in terms of ability is taking place after the sorting has occurred. That just doesn't seem right. But what seems to be the case is the women who are very, very advanced in mathematical ability aren't that interested in pursuing it as a career. So it's interest. So women underrepresented in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Well, women are whoppingly overrepresented in lots of disciplines, though. So, for example, they're becoming increasingly dominant in medicine. So, you know, and that's a real switch, because, of course, that wasn't the case 50 years ago. So, high-end, cognitively complex jobs that involve a lot of social interaction and a lot of care for people are overwhelmingly becoming dominated by women. So, but math, physical sciences, computer science, and engineering don't seem to be, at least at the moment, in that group. So, and there's occupations where women are unbelievably underrepresented. So, why do you think that is? I mean, if you looked at this list, what would you say? Why would that be? What's that? Things, okay. Anything else? Well, it's physical, a lot of that, right? Construction, forestry, mining. I mean, those are very, very physically demanding jobs, so they require a fair bit of strength. Generally, you have to be isolated somewhere, especially for forestry and mining. You know, and they're dangerous jobs. Men are way overrepresented in dangerous occupations. So almost all the exceedingly dangerous occupations are done by men. It's actually part of the reason that men make more money than women. There's a bunch of reasons. It's not pure arbitrary social prejudice by any stretch of the imagination. You need a multivariate equation in order to account for the differences. There's lots of different factors. One of them is that male-run small businesses make more money than female-run small businesses. And I think the reason for that is that females often do that part-time when they're having kids. So they're not devoted entirely to the small business, but it's a way that they can keep in the economic game while they're also pursuing their family. Men are more likely to move to work, and they're more likely to do dangerous jobs, and they're also more likely to work longer hours. And so all of those account for some of the reason that men are paid more than women. It's not pure prejudice. So there's a good example of the differences in male versus female dominated occupations. Brick masons, block masons, and stone masons. There's virtually no women. Cement masons, concrete finishers, and terrazzo workers. Electrical power line installers, carpet, floor, and tile installers. Heating, air conditioning, refrigeration mechanics and installers. Structural iron and rebar workers. Bus and truck mechanics and diesel engine specialists. Miscellaneous vehicle and mobile equipment mechanics, tool and die makers, and roofers. All of those are 99% or more male-dominated. Female-dominated occupations in the US. Number 1, secretaries and administrative assistants. You know, that's the most common job category for women. That's unchanged since the middle 1950s. So, and that's partly because those are actually pretty good jobs. They pay well, they're regular, they're secure, they're not too demanding, they're predictable. Like if you have to have a job rather than a career, that's, because a career is something, I suppose, that pays you outside of the money that you're making for the job. It's got additional benefits in terms of status or discovery or accomplishment or creativity. But if you just want a job, that's not a bad job. Secretaries, childcare workers, receptionists, teachers' assistants, registered nurses, bookkeeping, accounting, and auditing, clerks, maids and housekeeping cleaners, nursing, psychiatric and home health aides, personal and home care aides, and general office clerks. So